Chris McCoskey for Emerging Civil War, and I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at the gravesite of Major General John Fulton Reynolds, the 1st Corps commander killed on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. My ECW colleague Steve Fan, who is a huge John Reynolds fan, I'm sure even at this moment is weeping as he sees me standing here next to the gravesite of his hero. And really, Reynolds has become beloved as a Union commander in large part because of his martyrdom on the first day of Gettysburg, a scene that was captured with great poignancy and shocking swiftness by Michael Shara in his novel The Killer Angels, and that really did a lot to cement Reynolds' reputation in the modern era. But really, that reputation is pretty controversial. If we peel back the layers of mythology and adoration, we can see that Reynolds sort of had somewhat of a spotty service when he was with the Army. Of course, he's going to first have a bureaucratic position thanks to some string pulling by George McClellan. He'll finally kind of see action, so to speak, as a military governor in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where he'll actually get the respect of citizens because he will be very fair in his treatment of them. So much so that later on in the summer, when he's at the Battle of Gaines' Mill and he falls asleep and is captured and taken in an embarrassing fashion in front of his old friend D.H. Hill, who says, don't worry, it's the fortunes of war. He's sent off to Libby Prison, and the citizens of Fredericksburg petition for Reynolds' release, saying that he was fair, he was good to them, and they wanted to be supportive of him. He'll actually get exchanged for Lloyd Tillman, I think it is. And so he'll be back in action. He'll be part of the 1st Corps detachment that's sent off to help John Pope at 2nd Manassas, and even as Pope's army is coming to grief, Reynolds has his own sort of Stonewall Jackson moment on Henry House Hill and does some work to help kind of rally the Federal Army enough to forestall a complete rout in destruction. So there, Reynolds sort of earns part of his reputation as a fighting stalwart guy on the field. He'll miss the Antietam campaign because Governor Curtin of Pennsylvania will ask for Reynolds to come up to Pennsylvania and be in charge of the Pennsylvania militia during Lee's invasion of Maryland. Of course, Curtin, very nervous and scared, is thinking Lee's coming all the way up to Pennsylvania, which of course Lee was planning to do, and so he really wanted to have someone that he trusted in charge of Pennsylvania's forces. McClellan was rather disgusted by that. He said, why should we really let some scared governor ruin the effectiveness of an entire division? But of course, Pennsylvania being so politically important to Lincoln, Curtin's going to have his way. Reynolds will come back to the Army. He'll serve at the Battle of Fredericksburg, and there is kind of where one of his first controversies takes place. One of his division commanders, George Gordon Meade, Reynolds' close friend, has a breakthrough at Prospect Hill on the south end of the field, and Reynolds, unsure of his orders from his superior, William Franklin, doesn't reinforce Meade, even as Meade begs for reinforcements. Not that Meade could really beg Reynolds himself, because Reynolds was not really in position where he should have been as a Corps commander. Instead, he was out on the field directing artillery emplacements. That really is not the job of a major general who's in command of the Corps. So as my good colleague Chris White often argues, Reynolds always served on the field under his office, below his capacity. When he should have been directing things for the Corps, he's really doing sort of the thing that a battery commander should do. And he does that kind of time and time again in the war. He'll be very critical. Reynolds will be very critical of Burnside. Reynolds will get a promotion out of all that, by the way. During the Chancellorsville campaign, his 1st Corps will be rather underutilized by Joe Hooker. Reynolds will be disgusted, do a lot of marching, so much so that he will fall asleep again right in the middle of a council of war that Hooker calls. When he finally wakes up, he's like, why did Hooker call us all together if he was just going to do what he wanted to do anyways? Reynolds and many of the other Corps commanders wanted to fight, particularly because Reynolds had not committed. He knew his troops were fresh and ready and willing, and Hooker decided instead to retreat. Allegedly, on June 2nd, Abraham Lincoln offered Reynolds command of the entire Army of the Potomac, but Reynolds said no. He thought that the the Army was just too much of a political beast, too much interference from Washington. He told Lincoln that, if you give me that insulation from the politics, I'll do it. But Lincoln's still not ready to give up the reins. It'll take him another year before he's willing to do that. And finally, when Ulysses S. Grant comes to the east, Lincoln has finally learned that lesson. So instead, Reynolds will stay commander of the First Corps. He will lead his corps onto the field on the first day of battle at Gettysburg, where he is famously shot shortly after entering the fray, and that earns him his martyrdom. It takes a long way for his body to get home. It's only 50 miles from here in that direction to Gettysburg, but because of the Confederate Army and all the hassle and problems, he's got to take a long way to get home, where he's finally put to rest here in the cemetery. It's a pretty nifty obelisk. Let me tilt my camera down. A beautiful day to be out here and pay my respects to the general. So he's one of those guys that I urge you to really kind of take some time and look at, not necessarily because he's one of the great heroes of the war, although he certainly was heroic, but kind of what underpins that reputation. What were his pluses and his minuses? What might have been? What are those things that earned Reynolds his reputation? What are some of those things that kind of have clouded that reputation because of adoration? Makes him a fantastic, fascinating character study. In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I'm Chris Mikowski for Emerging Civil War.